What kind of people would dare challenge beings larger than mountains? In the ancient world of the Norse, giants were not just monsters hiding in forests. They were older than the gods themselves. They were forces of nature, creatures of frost, stone, fire, and chaos. To the Vikings, giants were known as Jotnar. And according to their stories, these giants once ruled the universe. Long before Odin, long before Thor, long before humanity even existed. Yet somehow, the Vikings believed their gods defeated them. But how could beings who lived in fragile wooden halls, sailed the cold oceans in open ships, and fought with axes and shields, believe that they had overcome creatures who could crush mountains and freeze oceans? Were the giants real enemies? Or were they something far more terrifying? To understand how the Vikings defeated the giants, we must travel back to the beginning of everything, to a time when the world itself was born from a corpse. According to Norse mythology, the first living being was not a god. It was a giant. His name was Ymir. In the endless void, known as Ginnungagap, two primordial realms existed. One was a world of fire. The other was a world of ice. When the freezing rivers of ice drifted into the warmth of fire, they began to melt. And from that melting ice, life appeared. Ymir was enormous, so vast that from his body came entire generations of frost giants. As he slept, new giants grew from his sweat. He was not just a creature. He was the ancestor of chaos. From Ymir's body came the entire race of giants, beings of immense strength, ancient knowledge, and unpredictable power. The giants represented raw nature itself. Storms, winter, volcanoes, earthquakes. For the Norse people, these forces were not just weather or geology, they were living enemies. But the giants' dominance would not last forever. Because three brothers were about to rise against them, the first war ever fought was not between humans. It was between gods and giants. The three brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, were born from a strange bloodline. They were descended from giants, yet they carried something new: order. Where giants embodied chaos, the gods represented structure, law, and creation. And the first thing they did was commit the most violent act imaginable. They killed Ymir. The battle must have been unimaginable. When Ymir fell, so much blood poured from his body that nearly every giant in existence drowned. Only a few survived, escaping to the far edges of the world. And from Ymir's corpse, the gods created everything. His flesh became the earth. His blood became the seas. His bones became mountains. His skull became the sky. The universe itself was built from the body of a defeated giant. But the giants were not gone. They retreated to a distant realm known as Jotunheim, and they waited. After defeating Ymir, the gods created a new world called Midgard, the realm of humans. But they knew the giants still existed, and they knew something else. The giants hated them. For centuries, an uneasy balance existed between the gods of Asgard and the giants of Jotunheim. Sometimes they fought. Sometimes they traded knowledge. Sometimes they even married. Yes, many Norse gods had giant blood in their veins. Even Odin himself had giant ancestry. This complicated relationship meant that giants were not always simple villains. They were rivals. Sometimes allies. Sometimes teachers. But whenever the giants grew too powerful, the gods needed a champion. And that champion was Thor. If Odin was the mind of the Norse gods, Thor was their shield. Thor was the god of thunder. But more importantly, he was the protector of both gods and humans from the giants. His weapon was Mjolnir, a hammer forged by dwarven master-smiths. Mjolnir was not just a weapon. It was unstoppable. When Thor threw it, it always returned to his hand. It could crush mountains. It could summon lightning. And Thor used it constantly. Norse myths describe Thor traveling to Jotunheim again and again, confronting giants who threatened the balance of the world. He smashed skulls. He shattered fortresses. He turned giants into legends of defeat. But some of Thor's battles were not about strength. They were about something far more dangerous: deception. One of the most famous stories reveals something surprising. Even Thor could be tricked. When Thor once visited the giant king Utgar the Loki, he was challenged to a series of contests. Thor was asked to drink from a horn. He tried with all his strength, but could not empty it. Then he tried to lift a giant cat, but he could only raise one of its paws. Finally, he tried to wrestle an old woman, and he lost. Thor, the greatest warrior of the gods, had been humiliated. But later the giant king revealed the truth. The horn Thor drank from was secretly connected to the ocean. The cat was actually the Midgard serpent, a creature so enormous it wrapped around the world. And the old woman was old age itself. Thor had not failed. He had nearly achieved impossible feats. The giants were not always defeated with brute force. Sometimes they fought with illusions, and sometimes the gods had to outthink them. For the Vikings, giants were not just enemies in stories. They represented the terrifying forces of the world they lived in. Blizzards that could kill an entire village. Volcanoes that could swallow the sky in ash. Endless winters that froze crops and livestock. The giants symbolized chaos, and the gods symbolized humanity's struggle to survive it. When Thor defeated a giant, it meant something deeper. It meant that order could temporarily overcome chaos, but never permanently, because the Vikings believed the giants would return. And when they did, the final battle would begin. In Norse prophecy, the giants were never truly defeated. They were only waiting. At the end of time, a catastrophe called Ragnarok would occur. The giants would march against the gods. Fire giants from Muspelheim would arrive with blazing swords. Frost giants from Jotunheim would march across frozen seas. Even Loki, once a companion of the gods, would lead them. The final war would destroy the universe. Thor would kill the world serpent, but he would die moments later from its venom. Odin would face the monstrous wolf Fenrir, and he too would fall. In Ragnarok, the giants would finally win. The world would burn. The seas would rise. Everything would end. But that was not the end of the story. The Vikings did not believe their gods were invincible, and that is what makes their mythology so unique. Unlike many ancient cultures, the Norse believed even the gods would die. This worldview reflected their own lives. They lived in harsh climates. They faced war, storms, hunger, and freezing winters. Victory was never permanent. Survival was always temporary. The stories of giants and gods were not just entertainment. They were reflections of reality. The giants were the chaos of the world. And the gods, like the Vikings themselves, fought against impossible odds. Not because they expected to win forever, but because fighting itself gave life meaning. So how did the Vikings defeat the giants? They didn't. Not completely. The giants were never meant to disappear. They were the storms that returned every winter. The earthquakes that shook the earth. The endless darkness of the northern night. In Norse mythology, defeating the giants meant something deeper. It meant resisting chaos for as long as possible. Standing your ground even when you know the battle will one day be lost. That idea, courage in the face of inevitable struggle, became the heart of Viking culture. And perhaps that is why these stories still fascinate us today. Because in many ways, the giants have never left. They simply take new forms. The question is, If they return tomorrow, would we still have the courage to face them? If you enjoy exploring the forgotten myths, ancient battles, and hidden truths of the Viking world, consider joining us here on Shadows of Valhalla. Because the sagas of the North are not just stories about the past. They are reminders of the strength it takes to face the giants in our own world.